नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरये अष्टप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवती उत्तमा श्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्ठिकी. Reading from Bhagavad Gita as it is, text chapter 8, attaining the Supreme, text number 24. अग्निः ज्योतिः अह शुक्लः अग्निर्ज्योतिरः शुक्लः षट्मासाः उत्तरायणम् षण्मासा उत्तरायणम् तत्र प्रयाताः गच्छन्ति तत्र प्रयात गच्छन्ति ब्रह्मविदः जनाः ब्रह्मविदो जनाः अग्निर्ज्योतिरः शुक्लः षण्मासा उत्तरायणम् तत्र प्रयात गच्छन्ति ब्रह्मविदो जनाः अग्निर्ज्योतिरः शुक्लः षण्मासा उत्तरायणम् तत्र प्रयात गच्छन्ति ब्रह्मविदो जनाः अग्निर्ज्योतिरः शुक्लः षण्मासा उत्तरायणम् तत्र प्रयात गच्छन्ति ब्रह्मविदो जनाः
अग्निर्ज्योतिरः शुक्लः षण्मासा उत्तरायणम् तत्र प्रयात गच्छन्ति ब्रह्मविदो
जनाः
अग्निर्ज्योतिरः शुक्लः षण्मासा उत्तरायणम्
षण्मासा उत्तरायणम्
गच्छन्ति
तत्र प्रयात गच्छन्ति
ब्रह्मविदो जनः
ब्रह्मविदो जनः
अग्निर्ज्योतिरः शुक्लः
अग्निर्ज्योतिरः शुक्लः
षण्मासा उत्तरायणम्
षण्मासा उत्तरायणम्
तत्र प्रयाता गच्छन्ति
प्रयात गच्छन्ति
ब्रह्मविदो जनाः
ब्रह्मविदो जनाः Online?
अग्निर्ज्योतिरः शुक्लः
अग्निर्ज्योतिरः शुक्लः
मासा उत्तरायणम्
षण्मासा उत्तरायणम्
तत्र प्रयाता गच्छन्ति
तत्र प्रयात गच्छन्ति
ब्रह्मविदो जनाः
ब्रह्मविदो जनाः
अग्निर्ज्योतिरः शुक्लः
अग्निर्ज्योतिरः शुक्लः
षण्मासा उत्तरायणम्
षण्मासा उत्तरायणम्
तत्र प्रयाता गच्छन्ति
तत्र प्रयात गच्छन्ति
ब्रह्मविदो जनाः
ब्रह्मविदो जनाः Your meaning Agnihi fire Jyotihi light Aha a Shuklaha the white fortnight Shatmasaha the 6 months Uttarayanam when the sun passes on the northern side Tatra there Prayataha those who pass away Gachanti go Brahma to the absolute Brahmavidaha who know the absolute Janaha persons But translation proper by Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Translation those who know the Supreme Brahman attain that Supreme by passing away from the world during the influence of the fiery God in the light at an auspicious moment of the day, during the fortnight of the waxing moon, or during the 6 months when the sun travels in the north. Translation with repetition. Those who know the Supreme Brahman attain that Supreme by passing away from the world during the influence of the fiery God in the light at an auspicious moment of the day during the fortnight of the waxing moon or during the 6 months when the sun travels in the north. When fire, light, day, and the fortnight of the moon are mentioned, it is to be understood that over all of them there are various presiding deities who make arrangements for the passage of the soul. At the time of death, the mind carries one on the path to a new life. If one leaves the body at the time designated above, either accidentally or by arrangement, it is possible for him to attain the impersonal Brahmajyotir. Mystics who are advanced in yoga practice and arrange the time and place to leave the body. Others have no control. If by accident they leave at an auspicious moment, they will not return to the cycle of birth and death. But otherwise, there is every possibility they will have to return. However, for the pure devotee in Krishna consciousness, there is no fear of returning, whether he leaves the body at an auspicious or inauspicious moment, by accident or arrangement. Thus, NC translating Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshnaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Prasharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyata Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So we are in the 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, that is Returning the Supreme, and we are in the last section of this chapter. This chapter can be divided into 6 sections, and the first section involved Arjuna's questions and Krishna's answers. And although Lord Krishna answered all of his questions except one, what happens to one when one, how one can remember the Lord at the time of death. And so continuing that answer, the section 2 begins about remembering Krishna at the time of death, how one can remember and why is it important to remember. And then in the section 3, there is particular mention about how to remember Krishna always, and also how people who are Yoga Mishra devotees, bhaktas, how they can also remember Krishna, that was mentioned. And then in the section 4, how Krishna is very easily obtainable to the devotees because of the annular devotion that the devotees render, how Krishna is easily achievable, and how they attain the supreme abode, the Lord. Then in the previous section, there was comparison between the material and the spiritual worlds and the glories of the supreme abode, how it is infallible, and it possesses all the wonderful qualities of the Supreme Lord. The Supreme Lord possesses all the 6 opulences in full, and similarly, the Lord's abode are also full of all the opulences of the Lord. And therefore, the spiritual world is very, very special. It's full of bliss, full of eternity, full of knowledge. And anyone who goes once never comes back to this mortal world. So after the Lord has explained all these things, then starting from the previous verse, we can see now the Lord is explaining about passing away from this world at different times. Now, one may wonder, why is that so important and how is this relevant? But it is very important to note that there are various factors that play a role in the life and the way we are influenced. We are very interdependent. We're not just living independently. So there is a lot of interdependence. And there's a lot of influence of various things on us. And one of the things that influence is actually the different times of the day. Just like how it is said that the morning time, Brahma Muhurta time is very auspicious, very easy. The results that is obtained by doing activities during the Brahma Muhurta is many, many times higher than doing activities at other times. And how it is, the mode of goodness is more prevalent in the morning. And how as the day progresses, the mode of goodness reduces and the other modes tend to become more prevalent. So in this way, there are different times of the day that also influence us as how we think, how we work, and so on and so forth. Similarly, there are different planetary systems, there are different stars. They also influence us in different ways. Although this is a science which we are not aware currently because we don't study astrology, but Srila Prabhupada mentions that the Brahmanas in the earlier days, and even now, in fact, actually Brahmanas one of the things that they learn is astrological calculations. So this is a part of it. Now, as we see in this verse, in today's verse especially, we see the word Shuklaha, which means the Prabhupada translates here as white. And in the translation, Prabhupada translates the fortnight of the moon. So the moon, based upon how the moon is changing from new moon, full moon to new moon. So in this way, there is a cycle in which the moon is, as how the moon is traveling, there are different days with different amounts of moonlight that we see, and each of them have a certain role that plays, and therefore we say a specific day to be Ekadashi. We fast on a specific day. We don't fast on any other day. We fast on Ekadashis. Similarly, there are different astronomical factors which are considered to be auspicious, and some are considered to be inauspicious. So all these play a role in different ways in our lives. And therefore, in the olden days, even now, if we see when someone wants to get married, immediately they go to a Brahman and ask, Swamiji, can you tell me which tithi is good? What time should it be done? What is the good muhurta for this? Similarly, someone wants to open a new store, open a house. Everyone is looking for a nice time, auspicious time to do it. Now, the Brahmanas, they were also well versed with the Jyotish Shastra or Jyotish Veda, Jyotir Veda, where they could, based upon the astronomical calculations, is only black screen visible?
Nothing is visible. Black. Something is,
Hare Krishna Prabhu, yes Prabhu.
One second.
the screen is flickering also.
On YouTube, Prabhu?
Yes, and Zoom.
Zoom we are able to hear.
YouTube is. You can join.
I'll try to share again one more time. What do you see now? You see anything?
No Prabhu, black.
Okay, that's okay. You can just hear me. That's fine. So basically, the astronomical factors play a role, and therefore all the Brahmanas, they were well educated, so they knew about different the different movements of the stars, planets, the moon, the sun, and they used to consider all these factors. And it is said that a king was always, there used to be a first class astrologer with the king. He would always travel with him. So anything has to be done, the king would consult the astrologer, and the astrologer would say that you fix so and so date, so and so time, do this activity, go for war at this time, do this at this time. So this astrology was a science, is a science, and it was well known in ancient times, and it was quite often used. And similarly, this astrological situation during the time of the birth, also, as we know, Nilambar Chakravarti, the grandfather of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he also saw the astrological chart of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Similarly, we see in Krishna book, Nanda Maharaj invites the Gargamuni, yes, to make the birth chart, astrological chart. And so in this way, for Namakarna, for all these things, the people in the ancient times, devotees, they would call out a Brahmana who's well versed with the astrological situation, and he would tell, oh, this son will become this, or so on and so forth, based upon the astrological situation. So this is even in the very beginning of the Krishna book, when we see the Lord's appearance, there is description about the how the planetary systems So even during the Lord's appearance, it is said as how all the planetary systems, all the stars. So there is a star known as Rohini, and it is said to be very, very auspicious. And it is said that at that point of time, the influence of the star known as Rohini became very, very predominant. And it is said that the star is under the direct supervision of Brahma. So, just like the movement, the position of the stars is important and auspicious, similarly, there are specific times based upon the planetary systems. So, one is the position of the stars, then based upon the planetary systems, which planet is in which place, which based upon that, there are certain auspicious and inauspicious times. So, it is said that when the Lord was appearing, Lord Krishna was about to appear at the time of his birth, all the planetary systems also become adjusted in such a way that everything became auspicious. And there were all auspicious stars in the sky, and there were all signs of good fortune. So we can see in this way that there is a description about different aspects of astrology in the scriptures and how they were taken into consideration for various reasons. And the Lord here is also taking aspect of astrological situation of at what time if one leaves this at what time when one leaves one's body, what happens to him. So here Lord is saying that for a person who is Brahma Vidaha means one who knows the absolute, or here Prabhupada writes, one who knows the Supreme Brahman. Now, this is again not for everyone. It is not about talking about a karmi or a layman. It is about someone who knows what the Supreme Brahman, the absolute. Now, what happens to him? Now, when he passes, so those who know the Supreme Brahman, Brahma Vidaha, pass away from the world. Prayata Gakshanti. During the influence of the fiery god Agni, Jyotir, in the light, at an auspicious moment, during the fortnight of the moon, Shuklaha, Shanmasaha, Uttarayanam, and the 6 months when the sun travels in the north. So, as we saw, there is description about the fortnight of the moon, and there is also description about the travel of the sun. So, the sun traveling Uttarayanam. There are 6 months in which the sun travels in the northern direction, and that the beginning of that is called Makara Sankranti. And it is said that the word Ayana means to go or the path, just like Ramayana, the path taken by Lord Rama. And similarly, here Uttarayana means to going towards the north. So when there are 6 months when the sun moves towards the north, is called Uttarayana, or the northern path. And the 6 months when it goes towards the south, and that is known as Dakshinayana, or the southern path. So it is said that the first day when the sun starts to move towards the northern direction, that is what we celebrate as Makara Sankranti. And it actually enters, the sun begins to move north and enter the zodiacal sign of Capricorn, and therefore it's called Makara. And the first day when the sun begins to move south, and then it enters into the sign of Cancer, and it's called Karakata Sankranti. So it is said that these 2 days are very, very appropriate for performing Shraddha ceremony. So in this way, the different days of the based upon the movement of the sun, movement of the moon, they are considered auspicious or inauspicious. Jiva Goswami says that it is not appropriate to perform Shraddha ceremony during Ekadashi Tithi, So in this way, the Vedic science was very, very well evolved. So they understood the astronomical influence of various stars, planets, motions of the sun, moon, and how it is plays a role in various activities of the living entities. And therefore, considering all this science that is existing, Lord is also mentioning here a few things that this time when the sun is moving north, when the fortnight of the moon, so as we know, there is waxing moon and the waning moon. So waxing moon is the Shukla means also white, where the new moon is going towards full moon, also known as Shukla Paksha, and similarly we have Krishna Paksha. So in this way, there are so many details in astronomy and astrology of the Vedic science, where they exactly knew based upon just the motion of the stars and the planets, they could describe the eclipses. They have wonderful calendars and so well designed. So this science is very, very special. And this is especially important for one who's not a pure devotee. So therefore, for various reasons, for various activities, one goes to a Brahmana to get information about these different auspicious and inauspicious times and how one can take benefit of them. So similarly, for one who is not a pure devotee, for them it plays a role as at what time of the year, what time when the sun and the moon is in a specific location, how is one passing away. So here the description is given of a person who's knowing the Supreme Brahman. So actually, there is a similar description of this verse that we are seeing here in the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. So in the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, where there is description where Narada Muni is instructing Maharaj Yudhishthira on various subject matter. And one of the subject matter is what is that a Grihastha must do, or what are the duties of a householder. In this way, there are various instructions that is given by Narada Muni. And in that connection, there is also a small discussion about what happens, what does a yogi does. And in this section, there's a very similar verse to what we are seeing today. As we see today, Agnir Jyotir Aha Shuklaha Shanmasa Uttarayana. There is a very similar verse which says Agnir Suryo Diva Pranaha Shuklo Rakto Uttaram Swarat. So the Agni is same, the word is same. Instead of Jyotir, the word that is used here is Surya. And Aha, instead of that, the word that is used is Diva, which also means day. And we also have Shukla. And we have extra word here called Raka, which is the full moon at the end of the Shukla Paksha. Shukla Paksha means the moon is starting, there's a new moon, and ending in a full moon. So here it's only mentioned as Shukla, that is the waxing moon, the moon starting to get brighter and brighter. But here it is also saying not just the Shukla, the beginning of the moon, a new moon, but it is also saying the full moon. And then the verse is also saying Uttaram. And here the word that is used is Uttarayana. So the first two lines of this verses is very, very similar. So in this instructions, Narada Muni also talks about what happens to different people when they leave the body. And one of the things is that a person who has understood Brahman. And what is the meaning of knowing Brahman? It is said that the yogis and those who are trying to control the mind, what they do is, so the mind has this quality of sankalpa and vikalpa. So it is always accepting something and rejecting something. So the mind is always agitated by something or other. There is waves of acceptance and rejection. So the mind is the example is given like of a tossing of the waves. So just like our waves are tossing up and down, similarly, there are said, Prabhupada writes, mental waves. So the mental waves are like one time I'm moving this direction, another time I'm moving the other direction. So in this way, one is floating in these waves of material existence. And this mind is creating a lot of trouble. Therefore, what these yogis or jnanis they try to do is that they try to control the mind. They try to subdue the agitated mind by various means. So some engage in sacrificing their senses, some engage in performing different kinds of pranayama. And in this way, what they try to do is they try to subdue the mind. And one way the jnanis engage in controlling and subduing the mind is by chanting Omkara. So by producing the sound of Omkara, the impersonal sound vibration of the Supreme Lord, and paying attention on that sound vibration, and eventually that vibration, they use it in the way they control the light wave. And in this way, what happens is that one becomes situated in a certain Brahman platform. And this is a certain type of sacrifice that one is follows. And it is for those kind of yogis or jnanis who are taking this route of trying to know the Brahman. For them, what happens at the time of death? At that, they pass at a specific point of time. And when they pass at the specific point of time, they also undergo a specific way of reaching the state of liberation. Their state of liberation is different from the state of liberation of a pure devotee. For a pure devotee, as soon as he leaves his body, he is immediately transferred to the Vaikuntha. There's no gap anywhere. But here, when a person who is knowing the Brahman and when he is passing at this time, there is something that happens. And what it happens is that he doesn't immediately becomes completely transcendental, but rather it is said, as Prabhupada writes in the purport, when fire, light, day, and moon are mentioned, it is to be understood that over all of them, there are various presiding deities who make arrangements for the passage of the soul. So it is said that there are these words, Agni, Jyotir, Aha, Shukla, all of them, there are various presiding deities. And the living entity is not immediately becoming transcendental, although he's knowing Brahman, yet he has to undergo a process. So the process that's mentioned here is that he first enters the Brahmaloka. And in that space, because he knows Brahman, because he has passed, he left his body at the right time, then he lives in the Brahmaloka for many, many millions of years. And what happens when he lives in this Brahmaloka? That his material designations come to an end. The idea that I am this body, I am this so and so, different kinds of material designation that one carries, that come to an end. But he then comes to a subtle designation. So although the gross material designations are vanished, he still carries certain subtle designations. So after that, he goes through a period of overcoming those subtle designations, and then he attends a certain thing called causal designation, where he is seeing all his previous states of living, where he has different designations and different ways of life that he has led. So he is witnessing the previous states of his designations. And after that, it is complete annihilation of the causal state or the different kinds of designation that one is having. It is said it is in that moment that he attains a pure state. So this process of reaching to the supreme or liberation is not the same as that of a devotee. So here one has to go to these different phases, go to Brahmaloka, live for many years, then gradually the material designations goes away. Then after material designation, there is subtle designations slowly start to vanish. And from that, the causal designation comes. And then from from that comes to a pure state. So in this way, the living entity becomes transcendental. And towards after the state of causal designation, the living entity starts to identify with the super soul. He recognizes his transcendental pure designation and starts to identify with Brahman or the Paramatma. And in this way, the living entity becomes transcendental. So it is also important to note that this path, although living at an auspicious time, is not an immediate step for the living entity to reach the transcendental abode. And furthermore, it is also important to note that the process of death is different for different people. And unfortunately, in the modern civilization, this idea of death is not very well understood. The modern civilization is very, very unaware of the consequences of the death. They do not recognize that how one should leave one's body, why it is so important. What happens at the point of death? People are not aware. People just think, oh, the person is dead, the life is gone, and there is nothing to worry about. No. There is the mind and intelligence carry the living entity. The subtle body carries the spirit soul into the next form of life, and based upon one's mind. So, based upon what is the mentality of the living entity at the point of death? So the mentality of the person is to think of a business. Prabhupada gives this example of a person who was thinking about a plant in which he was owner of some sort of a plant or a company, and he was thinking about that. And Prabhupada says, oh, maybe he will become a rat in that company. So basically, throughout our life, we are doing various activities, and those impressions are lying in us. Sometimes we are acting like father, sometimes we are acting like husbands, wife, children. And in this way, we are occupied with different designations and different mentalities coming to our subconscious mind and conscious mind. And at the time of death, when one is not prepared, one naturally starts to think what one has accustomed to think over the years. And for a materialist, the process of leaving the body is very, very difficult. So, whereas in case of the jnanis, yogis, and bhaktas, there is at least some training that they are undergoing. They are recognizing that this is not the right place to live. And even in case of the karma yogis, they recognize that this place is not better. There is some other better place. So, whereas the karmis, they do not have an idea that the soul takes another body in the next life. And they do not recognize that they are creating a certain good or bad situation for themselves based upon what they are in the current situation. So usually being too much engrossed in family life or in one's own occupation, one is thinking of money, one is thinking of one's own family, as we saw in the case of Ajamila, how he was thinking of his son. But by the mercy of the Lord, at least he gave the name Narayana to his son. But otherwise, it is so difficult situation for people in general who are just busy after materialistic pursuits, that their only mentality at the time of death is to have some sort of material profit. And therefore, Prabhupada says that the modern civilization is soul-killing civilization, and they are not spending any amount of effort on spiritual realization, understanding the value of life. So, therefore, Prabhupada emphasizes that there has to be a systematic training of the mind and intelligence. Because at the time of death, it is the subtle body which is carrying the one to another state of life. So, if the mind and intelligence is trained, then at the time of death, one may consciously desire a suitable body, either on this planet or another planet, or even on a transcendental planet. So, Prabhupada says a civilization that does not consider the progressive advancement of the immortal soul merely fosters a bestial life of ignorance. So how we are so ignorant about this fact that this progressive advancement of the soul is forgotten in all the so-called activities of the modern civilization. And therefore, the so-called of education, so-called so many things that we are trying to do, but there is no idea whether is this living entity's soul progressing or not progressing. We send children to schools, we go to offices, we do so many things. But if we do not have this consideration that whether is my soul or is the soul of the people who are under me, are they going towards progressive advancement by fixing their mind and intelligence on the Supreme? If that is not happening, it is Shamaya Kevalam. So in all our activities, especially living in the families where one has responsibility, one should always make sure how is the mentality of the children, how is the mentality of the family is being trained. Because there has to be some training. It is not that whimsically one can go on endlessly pursue material goals while also trying to become spiritualist. It is not possible. Prabhupada used example, if you're holding something in your hand, if I were to give you something, you cannot hold it. So similarly, if one is trying to hold material things in the hand, then one will not be able to hold spiritual things. So therefore, the yogis recognize that the time of death is a critical point of time, and therefore the yogis who are very, very perfect, they can decide when they want to leave the body. Ichha Mrityu. That means they decide when and what time, which place they want to leave the body. And Prabhupada writes here, mystics who are advanced in yoga practice can arrange a time and place to leave the body. Others have no control. So just see, even basic things just like hunger, we cannot control. We cannot control so many things. And what to say about death? How can we control? It's natural, basic things we struggle to control ourselves. So we have no ability to control when to die, how to die. And therefore, this practice of spiritual advancement is a constant factor which is recommended in all spiritual, all religious and spiritual practices. And the yogis recognizing this, they learn how to control their pranavayu, how to control their life air. And they are able to, as we saw in some of the previous verses, as how they know by the perfect practice they can control their life air, and they know when to leave the vital force, life air, from the top part of the skull and leave the body. The soul leaves the body from the hole in the skull called Brahmarandra. So, but this is only possible for one who is very perfect in the process of yoga. But it is not for everyone. And it is so rare and so difficult to become an expert yogi who can practice all these principles. And we must know that as we see Prabhupada in Easy Journey to Other Planets, Prabhupada also writes how a yogi can also decide whichever planet he wants to go, he can go. So in this way, there are different things that one can have, but one must recognize that in the human form of life, you have got this ability to live consciously, to live, understand our position, understand the position of the Lord, our relationship with the Lord, and choose the highest thing. And Prabhupada says that in the living of miserable life in the material world is said to be like, Prabhupada quotes this, illustrates Milton, the paradise lost is how one is losing the paradise, the supreme spiritual abode, which is what one is capable of living in. But by one's own free choice, one is coming to a material world and it's like paradise lost. But again, by the choice, by the use of the free will, the living entity can still go back to the real paradise, which one is actually waiting for. And that's what Prabhupada says. However, for the pure devotee, in Krishna consciousness, there is no fear of returning, whether he leaves the body at an auspicious or inauspicious moment. So, as we saw, there are various aspects of astrological, astronomical calculations which are considered to do various things. But one who's a pure devotee, just like we saw, as soon as the Lord appeared, all the planetary systems, all the constellations, all the stars, they rearranged to be auspicious. So similarly, when one chants the name of the Lord, when one associates with the Lord, when in some form or the other one is engaged in Krishna consciousness, then that becomes an auspicious time, that becomes an auspicious situation. Then one doesn't have to worry where one is leaving one's body, what time one is leaving the body. So the goal of the devotee is not to worry about all these factors, but rather to become Krishna conscious, and rather to be worried whether am I engaging in the service of the Lord. That should be the worry of the devotee, because the devotee knows that if I'm engaged in the service of the Lord, if I'm thinking of the Lord will protect me. Just like the example that was given, how the death can be seen in different perspectives. And for a devotee, the death is like a cat carrying a kitten. So the death is a very safe place, because the living entity knows, oh, I'm going to my Lord's place, I'm going to my real place, and therefore there is no fear of death. And the devotees, Narayana Parana, he is not afraid of living in hell, living in heaven, or anywhere, because one is fully confident because of being Krishna conscious, is no more afraid of anything. So that is what a devotee aspires. A devotee is not dependent upon any of these external factors, but rather is only dependent on the mercy of the Lord. This is a very important aspect that will emerge in this section of verses, where although there are different points of time where leaving body one goes back, gets liberation, or one comes back to the material world, but in all these circumstances, these are meant for one who is not a devotee. But on the other hand, if you take devotional service, then either a good time or so far inauspicious time, based upon the external calculations, it may appear. But one must know that by the mercy of the Lord, as we see in the case of Ajamila, although he has performed so many sinful activities, but because he has chanted the name of the Lord, chanting the name of the Lord is so powerful that immediately, although he chanted to call out his son, but because he called out without offense, immediately the Vishnu Dutas came there. So we have to be dependent on this process that is given by Srila Prabhupada, to chant the holy name of the Lord, to be dependent upon the Lord, and always be engaged in the service of the Lord. And when we do this sincerely and seriously, constantly, then we have to not worry about anything about what will happen to the point of death, because we are in the right process of what we should actually do at the time of death. Lord will also give us His mercy in case if you're not able to remember. By Lord's mercy, you will be able to remember Him. By our own ability, we may not be able to remember, because the condition of the body, mind can be very, very troublesome. It can be very, very painful. That there will be so many things which will be under there will be no control over what one is trying to do at that point of time. So, although that can be a very, very painful, difficult situation, but the Lord being merciful, as we saw, the Ajamila did some service before he fell prey to the prostitute. He was a Brahmana who was practicing all the Brahmanical principles, who was rendering service to the Lord. So in this way, we should engage ourselves in rendering sincere service to the Lord. Then we have to not worry about returning to this world again. We can actually go back to the real paradise. And for that, we should also remember that the training of the mind, free will, and intelligence is needed. So without the training, we will not be able to completely overcome our different mentalities that we are carrying. Some are gross, some are subtle, some are deeply rooted within us, which have different tendencies of enjoyment and different tendencies of lording over the material world, other people. So these tendencies that we carry, unless they are not purified by the process that is given to us, then there is a chance that maybe one more or many more lives is required. But if we sincerely practice and also try to overcome the negative influence that we carry in our life, then by Lord's mercy and for Prabhupada's mercy, one can go back to spiritual world within this lifetime. I'll stop here and see if there are questions or comments.